We're getting very close. In fact, I would make a strong statement that in 2026, we will see a growth of sanctioned racing outside of what we currently have, which is our World Championship event every year.
Hello, and welcome to episode 82 of the Virtual Velo Podcast, the show that bridges the gap between athlete and avatar, keeping it real in the world of cycling esports. With me, Chris Schwenker. And with us is the UCI Cycling Esports Coordinator, Jacob Fraser. We had Jacob on the podcast a year ago during the lead up to the 2024 World Championships, and he's here again to talk about this year's event. It's great to have you back.
Yeah, thanks for having us, Chris. Excited to chat with you today.
Jacob, it's always a pleasure, and we're happy to have you back with us again. Last time we talked, you shared your background as the son of a professional hockey linesman and how that guided your path to cycling esports, first to Zwift, then to MyWhoosh, and now with the UCI. For anyone who missed that, they can find it in episode 54 of the podcast. Actually, a really good one. I suggest that you listen to it. Obviously, a lot has happened since then. But before we dive into that, could you take a moment to catch us up on your current role with the UCI? Specifically, can you give us some insight into your responsibilities, the hierarchy, and the overall scope of your duties now that it's been a year since we last checked in with you?
Yeah, crazy to think it's been a whole year since then. It's both long and short at the same time, but not much has changed on our side at the UCI. I'm still within our major events and Olympic programs unit at the UCI. We report up into Peter, our sports director, and everything's really the same on our side. We've obviously grown the discipline in the last year and are looking forward to the second edition of the Esports World Championship with MyWhoosh, our fifth edition overall. So things are going really well. We're excited for it this year. I think there's a lot to be excited about, both from the athlete's perspective and the fans' perspective. But as it relates to my role within the UCI, everything's moving along well. It's crazy to think it's coming to the end of my third year with the UCI. How exciting. I enjoy working with the team, and there's a lot to learn from the other disciplines. And we're just trying to grow cycling esports as best we can.
So speaking about those 2024 World Championships, looking into the rearview mirror now, it's been a year since that groundbreaking event. The first live final on a new platform, MyWhoosh, as you mentioned. Too many momentous occasions for cycling esports to count. But after a year of analysis and reflection, what do you feel were the biggest positives and the key goals that you feel were achieved? And what demonstrated the magnitude and potential of cycling esports on that day?
Yeah, absolutely. As you said, there's been a lot of momentous occasions to point out in that event. And I think first and foremost, when we went through the tender process for our 3-year bid and we ended up awarding it to MyWhoosh, one of the comments that I made that has been repeated is that we were looking for a partner that was willing to invest in the discipline. And certainly everybody who submitted a bid was willing to invest, but MyWhoosh really demonstrated that investment in last year's venue final. That live final was fantastic. I know you were there as well, Chris. So it's an easy thing to remember because it was so impactful to the people who were there in the venue with us in Abu Dhabi. But it was fantastic to see the commitment by the MyWhoosh team, and really that entire company came together to deliver that program. And it was fantastic working with them throughout. So hats off to them and a massive thank you to them, and looking forward to at least 2 more editions with them. Obviously, just a few weeks time, we'll be back over there. I think looking back on 2024, as you said, having the first live final, our first in-person esports event, there was a lot of unknowns. The UCI had done a lot of work in previous editions or in smaller versions of live events with previous partners to close some or to address some unknowns. But there was a lot that we and MyWhoosh had to work through together for the first time. And they proved to be a fantastic and collaborative partner to solve some of those problems. Things like hardware in the venue, just internet stability in such a large venue, the athlete experience. Athletes are particular people, let's say, especially our esports athletes who are used to competing from the comfort of their own home, where they're in complete control of every aspect of their setup. We're not thrusting them into the public setting. They don't have control over the temperature. They don't have control over the lighting or the music or anything like that. So MyWhoosh was great in terms of catering as best they could to the athlete experience. And then at the end of the day, I think we delivered a pretty spectacular show. The race was engaging. We saw men and women race the 3 different stages very differently. We saw different types of competitors come to the forefront at different moments in the race. I think it was a really compelling competitive aspect to that event. Never mind all the beautiful lights and laser light shows and things of that nature. So it's hard to point out one specific thing or even a handful of specific things, but I think the demonstration that esports is here to stay and it can be a very legitimate and very spectacular show to see was really shown well in Abu Dhabi last year.
Yeah, I think people lose sight of the fact that it was the first time, right? And you were just going in there. Well, of course, you did your homework, but you were basically blind. And I must say that I have yet to see a live event that didn't have some sort of technical glitch until that event. Everything went off really smoothly. So applause to everybody involved for all those successes. And there were also, as with any big first-time event, areas for improvement. From your perspective at the top of the governance ladder where you sit here, what did you learn from the 2024 edition? And what are the key areas of improvement you've prioritized this year?
It's a great question. And I think first and foremost, from the UCI's perspective, our primary goal is always to have a fair competition. We want to protect the sport's integrity. And provide the athletes equal opportunity to achieve success. And I think we delivered on that last year. I come from an events background, so I've always maintained that if you asked me to do the exact same event the next day, I could make improvements to it. And the MyWhoosh team shares in that sentiment. We went through a pretty lengthy kind of debrief process after the event, discussing what went well, what can be improved, what could be added or changed or removed. And they came up with some fantastic ideas. Obviously, we here at the UCI had some strong feedback. Even the athletes who competed on stage and the people who were in attendance had some feedback to provide as well. So moving into 2025, I think our main focus is still on ensuring the fairness and the integrity of the competition. At the end of the day, that's the most important thing, that every athlete on stage is provided the same opportunity to achieve their dream of becoming a world champion. But from there, there's always improvements we can make. I think our three main focuses this year are going to be around the broadcast product. That's an area that nobody felt was delivered extremely well last year. Technically, it was sound. It didn't tip over. It didn't suddenly cut out, nothing like that. But there's a lot we can do to grow our sport through broadcast rights. And that's a big area of focus this year. We also want to improve the athlete experience. I think, again, for these athletes coming out of their basements or their garages or their living rooms, wherever they race, it's a massive change to then be such a large venue, to not have control, and just the elevation of a world championship. No disrespect to any elite level racing, but it's not quite on the same level as a world championship. So there's a lot more that the athletes have to go through, and we want to make that experience even more seamless if possible. And then thirdly, I think we're always going to work on evolving the race product, evolving the competition structure. We want to continue to make improvements in that area. It's a job that's never going to be finished. But if we can deliver a fair competition where all the athletes have an equal opportunity to win, then we want to try and make it the most engaging and exciting, and all of the things we all love so much about sport, the nail-biting finishes, the race to the line, those types of things. And so we're always going to continue to tweak the competition structure to try and deliver a really exciting product at the end of the day.
Yeah, so that exciting product actually leads me to my first question about this year's event, the format. It's always a big talking point. While some aspects remain the same this year, like the 3-stage points race, others have evolved. What did you identify from last year's format that worked, and what didn't play out as you had hoped or anticipated? And how are you changing that this year?
Yeah, something we've discussed at length. I mean, I think when you get a bunch of smart people in a room who are thinking of how to make an engaging race format or to make an exciting race finish, you're taking in a lot of variables. Things like, how are the athletes going to respond? We have a really unique aspect to cycling esports in that through our semifinal qualification pathway, we don't know how many representatives from each nation will be on stage in Abu Dhabi. I think last year on the women's side, we obviously saw a strong contingent by the Swedish team. On the men's side, we had a pretty strong contingent of American men. And both those kind of national teams played the race structure very differently from one another, even though they were the overwhelming statistical majority of both the men and women's races. They had a very different strategy, and neither strategy was the one we thought they would have going into the race. So we're guessing in a lot of ways. Obviously, with the team over at MyWhoosh and our team here at the UCI, we have a wealth of experience on how races might play out. With cycling esports, we have the unique advantage of having quite a bit of data on these athletes and on these race courses. I do not envy my counterparts at the UCI who go into new race courses every year that have never been ridden before, because they're guessing just a bit more than I have to. Whereas in the MyWhoosh worlds, we'll have data from riders on those roads prior to the championships ever playing out. And then at the end of the day, we also have the ability to make changes between the semifinals and the finals if we needed to, whether it be through point scoring structure or just how the stages themselves unfold. So we've continued on with our 3-stage point scoring format, the pseudo omnium style that esports has adapted over the last few years. I think what it's shown is that both from a viewer's perspective and also the racer's perspective, you can put a lot of effort into a very short amount of time. And it creates very dynamic racing. It creates very exciting racing. As a fan of cycling myself, I've always found the Women's World Tour Peloton and their slightly shorter stages to be much more engaging and exciting than some of the longer men's stages, in my personal opinion. And esports takes that to the nth degree, right? Our races are typically 20 to 30 minutes long. And these athletes can put out some superhuman power for that duration of time. So we've adjusted the race format. I think last year we saw the F1 qualifying style of event that we tried to do in stage 1. And again, the men's and women's races really demonstrated a different opinion. I think we've all told the story of when the American men just stopped riding, everybody panicked for a moment and thought there was a technical issue, a demonstration of a strategy we did not predict unfolding on the day. But for this year, we're evolving that format ever so slightly. We're sticking with the 3 stages and the point scoring opportunities. And what the MyWhoosh team has proposed and the UCI has agreed to is a really exciting format that allows different styles or capabilities of riders to shine at different opportunities. So there's no clear preferred power profile. There's no clear athlete type that will win or run away with this event. We hope it'll be engaging throughout all 3 stages and that athletes of all different backgrounds and all different riding styles will have a fair and legitimate opportunity at winning the rainbow jersey.
So the stages 2 and 3 now are pretty straightforward. We've seen those before, but the first stage, the mountain's verdict, the elimination, that's a major innovation. Can you explain how that came to be conceptually and how we see that playing out as far as gaps? And now that it's the first stage, is that going to be a major factor or a prologue, as I discussed with Matt when we had him on the podcast?
I think it's going to depend on how the riders approach the course. As we all know, it's up to the riders on the day, how they tend to put the effort forth. The idea for that elimination-based stage, it actually comes from 2 different areas. I think we've seen in both traditional cycling and cycling esports previously that elimination-based races have a certain level of engagement. Obviously, we've borrowed from track cycling on this topic, but in previous editions of our World Championship and even other elite level racing, we've seen elimination-based racing before, and that's very engaging from a viewer's perspective, I believe. I think the good news is with this edition, it's not as if once you're eliminated, you're out of the rest of the event. You've just stopped scoring points for that stage. And so you'll still have an opportunity to make up those points in stages 2 or 3. And I think at the end of the day, it's up to the riders if they want to really push themselves forward and try and gain as many points as possible on that first stage. You know, how many matches have they burned? What type of legs do they have then for stages 2 or 3? And I think there's a very real possibility that an athlete puts out an exactly measured effort, says, I have this amount of power to put out for this duration of time to maintain some freshness for stages 2 and 3. What points I lose between that and the winner of that stage, so be it. I'll try and make it up later on. So I think it'll create a very engaging format. And the last point I would make on that stage 1 is we're actually borrowing from a very popular outdoor run racing format. This concept that the finish line chases you. It's used quite a bit in the running world, and that the run race will start and then a pace car or a pacer will kind of sweep from the back of the race. And it just inverts the very traditional finish line mentality that you're running from point A to point B. And now you're running from point A to wherever point B might catch you. So hopefully it adds a little bit of dynamic kind of strategy to the race. And again, you know, the best climbers in the world, it still takes quite a bit of effort to get up a mountain at a pretty significant pace that this chase line is going to come after you. So it's going to be up to the athletes to see, do they just outlast the competition? Do they measure their effort based on what they know they can achieve? Or do they throw it all to the wind and go for as long as they can and score as many points as possible and try and hang on through stages 2 and 3? So it'll be a very exciting race format, similar to last year. We have our ideas on how it might play out, but let's see what happens.
You used the word inverting, and up until about a week ago, stage 3, the Sprinter's Paradise, was going to be stage 1. and the mountain vertical was going to be stage 3, which I mentioned I thought was going to be a more compelling way to construct the race when we did have Matt on the podcast a couple weeks ago. So did something come out to change your mind? Was it more data? Did you run more scenarios? What is the reason for the change with the latest revision of the racebook?
I don't think there's any one reason. From the very beginning of this idea, we have a weekly call with the MyWhoosh team to discuss all things World Championship. And from the very beginning, the collective group was kind of hemming and hawing on which order to put these stages in. And at the end of the decision-making process, we really encouraged MyWhoosh to continue running scenarios, right? We call it just gaming it out. Let's see at different power profiles, what do different point values award? What do athletes have the ability to achieve based on the most recent power data that we've seen? And they just continued to do that. And I think at the end of the day, we wanted a compelling and an exciting race format, and this will provide us the best opportunity for that. Not to say leaving the climbing or the elimination stage for the end would have not been compelling. We just think that this would be the best opportunity for a compelling race format. I don't think there was any one thing that tipped the scales, but the more tests we ran, the more data we put into the model, the better chance we thought that this would create a compelling and exciting race format.
I tend to agree. Now,
let's
some
see.
Of the races,
we're either all right or we're all wrong. We'll find out.
Well, there might be an in-between. There usually is. The racers are concerned now. Should they be worried that there's going to be a change for the final?
I have a young son and a beautiful wife at home, and I'm never going to tell anybody how they should feel. I've learned that in my fatherhood journey. I can't tell you how to feel. I don't think the athletes have to be worried, though. We'll make changes if we feel that the riders need for any number of reasons. But obviously, again, the race integrity and the fairness of the event is our first concern. We want to protect the athletes and promote athlete welfare. And then we also want to make sure it's an exciting and compelling race format. So we'll go through the semifinals on the 3rd of October. And if we feel the need, I think if I was a wagering man, I would say that the point values may change. I would be really surprised if the order of events changes. Again, we've run quite a few scenarios on this and done a lot of modeling against it. So I can't imagine a world in which we change it, but that possibility always exists. I don't think the athletes need to worry about it too much, though.
So just changing gears a little bit, a topic that's come up fairly often in the lead-in here is the qualification process. When we last spoke, you said we're communicating with our national federation partners earlier. How has that connection gone this year, and did you feel it progressed well?
Yes, I do think it's progressed well, and that's a very complex question. Our national federations are not a monolith. They're not a singular entity that react the same way consistently or even amongst themselves. And that's very good. That's a positive thing. I don't think it's ever great to have a monolith or a singular attitude amongst any diverse group of people across the globe. And so some of our national federations have been more engaged than they were last year. Others have been less engaged because they feel they've learned how to operate and they've supported esports. They found that kind of homeostasis level. We've seen new federations come to the table and start to really engage with esports. And we've seen some kind of fade away into the background because it doesn't fit for them. And all of those are acceptable variables between the different national federations. They obviously have a body of athletes that they need to serve as best as they can. And we at the UCI are here to serve our national federations as best as we can. So I think we will see more national federations represented in our semifinal race than we've ever seen before in a cycling esports event. We will see more athletes at our semifinal race than we have ever seen at an elite esports event like this. And so by that measure, yes, we've certainly seen higher engagement. We've seen better growth. But like everything, there's always room for improvement. We will continue to work with our national federations, both on the esports world championship front, but on any esports program that they think will serve their athletes best. And we'll continue to work with them through all of it, the ups and the downs. And it's a partnership that's going to take a really long time and never be finished, which is very exciting for us. We want to continue to evolve the National Federation's relationship with esports and see how we can get more people participating in this discipline.
So on that topic, There's been some confusion amongst the athletes, some riders voicing criticism about a lack of transparency and mixed messages with the qualification criteria. I think you even saw a petition to voice opinions on the rollout. Do you acknowledge the athletes' concerns? And if so, where did the process get hung up and how could these situations be avoided in the future?
Yeah, back to having a young son and a wife at home. I do acknowledge the athletes' feelings. Certainly, they're allowed to feel that way. And I do tend to agree with them. It was not the most clearly communicated qualification pathway. Things were shifting as we were rolling it out to that public. So I don't want to say messages changed, but perhaps we could have been more buttoned up in our communication. Certainly, if the athletes are coming to us and asking for clarity, we've done something wrong and we need to clarify that. And so we worked to do that this year, I think. Not to make excuses, but there are two very real kind of inputs to this. The first of which is that we had to work with the MyWhoosh team in terms of when the technology and their updates were ready to host open qualifications. What is very unique about cycling esports is that we've maintained this open qualification pathway where anybody can qualify for this event. You don't have to be selected by your national federation. You don't even have to be qualified through your national federation. You can qualify through a very open and public pathway, which is extremely exciting for our discipline and for our athletes, but it's very uncharted territory in a lot of ways as well. So we were working with the MyWhoosh team to make sure that that open qualification pathway was ready. And then the second thing that I think is difficult for us as a discipline is we're just trying to fit into a very busy cycling calendar across the globe and across the 12 months of the year. We've previously had our World Championship and what I would say is quarter one of the year or Northern Hemisphere winter, that January, February, March timeline. We've tried to sneak it in between kind of the end of cyclocross season and the start of road classic season. It's a very fine window. With the MyWhoosh team, we've tried to thread the needle a little bit on the other side and fit between the end of the road season and the beginning of the cyclocross season. I'm using those two disciplines, but there are many others. We have indoor cycling, we have the track cycling, we have so many different versions of cycling on the calendar that it's very difficult to find a time window where there's nothing happening. And for our qualification pathway, with the decision to put the World Championships in kind of quarter four of the year, our qualification pathway overlaps with outdoor cycling season in the Northern Hemisphere, right? We have road events happening all summer long. You still have track events happening, obviously. And so it just creates a very compounding problem for us in terms of trying to get national federations to clearly understand our qualification pathway, trying to get our athletes to clearly understand how many esports athletes still ride their bike outdoors, both professionally or semi-professionally. And so it's a difficult time of year to do a qualification. And I think because of that, some of the messaging was lost. We were trying to find the best opportunity to do it. And we missed the mark. We'll be better next year, certainly, in terms of making sure the athletes understand their pathway. All of that being said, I feel very strongly that nobody has missed out on qualifying for the semifinals that wanted to be at the start line. Was it a more stressful or perhaps less clear journey between knowing that it was open and getting there? Sure, I will admit that. But I don't feel anybody has missed out on the opportunity to qualify for the semifinals. And at the end of the day, I think that's what's most important. We can work to make it less stressful or less confusing or less difficult. But we have the athletes at the start line of the semifinals who want to be there.
Yes, I've heard you say multiple times the critical area is athlete wellness and competition integrity. In fact, the UCI released a press release this morning regarding safety measures approved by the management committee following a meeting in the Road Worlds in Kigali. While everyone was looking for handlebars and helmets, I was scanning for anything cycling esports related, which there usually isn't until I found this. Also concerning rider health, a new weigh-in protocol for athletes competing in cycling esports events was approved. The objective of the UCI Cycling Esports weigh-in protocol to be introduced at UCI sanctioned events where riders compete in person is to eliminate dangerous weight cutting using voluntary dehydration, as well as to promote fair competition. It's a part of a longer-term vision to safeguard athlete well-being in this relatively new and fast-growing cycling discipline. A lot was said there in very few words, and I'd love to really go through this with you. Last year, there was a lot of talk and over weight cutting behavior surrounding the 10-hour weigh-in window, with even the world champion in the post-race press conference calling it part of the sport. Do you consider weight cutting or weight gapping a legitimate part of cycling esports?
It's a very complex question and a very complex topic. I think we have to respect athlete agency and how athletes can safely and supportively alter their weight is their decision to make at the end of the day. We see this across almost all cycling disciplines where athletes are under the supervision of medical directors to help optimize their body as best they can. And we want to respect that. However, it's also imperative that we as the governing body protect athletes as best we can. So to your question, very bluntly, do I see weight cutting as part of cycling esports? No, personally, I do not. I think if an athlete wants to optimize their power to weight ratio and they can do so safely, then they're more than welcome to do that. In the same way, a road athlete will want to find the lightest weight bike possible, or a track athlete wants to find the most aerodynamic bike possible. There's always optimization to be had in cycling. That's one of the kind of paramounts as a sport that we've seen for generations. But what we want to do is provide an atmosphere that allows the athletes to do so as safely and as healthy as possible. And so what we saw last year with the extreme dehydration is something we want to avoid. And we've seen this across other sports as well. We borrow quite a bit from weight class sports like boxing or fight sports as well, combat sports. And in consultation with our medical director and a bunch of other people, yourself included, Chris, across the industry, we want to protect the athletes from dangerous behaviors and limit both the reward and the consequence for those dangerous behaviors. And I think what happens is two things. First, we have to educate the athletes. We need to make sure they understand the dangers that they could put themselves in. And then secondly, again, we want to eliminate both the reward and the consequence to that. And so for us this year, what that press release is mentioning is around a hydration policy. So our athletes at in-venue or in-person events will not only undergo a pre-race weight that we will try to get as close to the start of the race as possible, but that weigh-in will also be qualified through a hydration test, in that if an athlete shows up and is very dehydrated, their weight will not be valid and they will be provided an opportunity to safely rehydrate and then reweigh. The goal of our sport is to have athletes show up at the start line in a healthy and hydrated state, prepared to race to the best of their ability. I think athletes have found over the previous few years that dehydration is the easiest way and the most impactful way to cut weight. And then if they have the opportunity to rehydrate, or if they train their body to compete in a dehydrated state, they can maintain their power to weight ratio as best as possible. But that's obviously very dangerous to the athletes. And we've seen this again in combat sports. It's a very dangerous thing to do. And we want to eliminate it as best we can in cycling. So by adding in the hydration policy, we're hopeful to eliminate one of the more dangerous aspects of weight cutting, which is intentional dehydration. And I want to point out and be very specific in pointing this out, that this is just a first step for us. I by no means think that this is the most comprehensive and complete version of athlete welfare and athlete protection on this topic. I think there's more to come. We certainly want to continue to support athlete education. In fact, the paragraph prior to the one you just read within that press release talks about our medical director's support of education around Red S, a different problem that's affecting most of cycling right now, and something we want to promote within cycling esports is education on that topic as well. And we'll certainly see a continued evolution on just the weigh-in process in general. Our sport is very, very focused on power to weight, just based upon how the algorithms work in the virtual world and how cycling as a whole sport works in terms of propelling yourself forward, both in time and space. Not to get too esoteric about it, but it's our job at the UCI to minimize the impact on the athletes and protect their welfare as best as possible. And this is a good first step. I'm comfortable in this step. It won't be our final step on this topic, but it's a very good first step.
All right. So I heard it's going to be education around it, which is obviously something that many people have called for a very long time. Will the process be conducted under medical supervision?
Yes, we will have, as we always do, an athlete briefing. I think in a lot of discipline, it's called a manager's meeting ahead of both the semifinals and the finals. And in both of those, rider briefings. We will cover this topic both from procedural process, how it will be done, what the expectations on the athletes are, but it will also cover education on the practice of dehydration or just weight cutting in general. It's a very complex topic and one we have to move forward with tact and expertise, and that's what we're trying to do here. We will have medical professionals on site in Abu Dhabi, both to oversee the hydration testing and the weigh-in protocol, and be available to the athletes throughout the duration of their time in Abu Dhabi to ask any questions. Or again, if they do fail a hydration test, provide them guidance on how to do it best. I think our esports athletes are unique in that some of them won't have national federation representation with them on the ground in Abu Dhabi. And even then, still, I don't think all of the national federations will come with the same level of support. Some have the funding to bring medical professionals or coaches with them, and some do not. And so we have to try and create a level playing field for all athletes on the education aspect. And we want them to have the same access to any resource that will help them both be safe and compete healthy, but also to have the same advantage as any of their other competitors.
So one of the things that comes up in the education is the definition of what weight gapping or weight cutting is. The NCAA wrestling, which is where this regulation and movement started when two athletes died because of extreme dehydration measures. And they went as far as to create a clear-cut definition and to regulate it out of the sport. Basically, if you're caught doing this, then you can't compete. Is that going to be part of this education or the actual regulation that you've created?
We have updated our regulations as well that include sanctions against weight cutting or weight gapping in an unhealthy manner. We haven't very clearly defined it. Again, we're taking the lead of our medical director at the UCI. And for a discipline within the UCI, we'll follow what the rest of our disciplines do on this topic. But we're supporting that. I think we're pushing very aggressively to get that education and get some of those regulations in place for it. So again, this is a good first step. I don't think it's our last step, and defining the behavior or behaviors is a good first step for us, or rather a good next step for us to take to help promote that athlete welfare and protect the athletes as best we can.
You mentioned the weigh-in window as close to the start of the event as possible. What does that mean? You also mentioned that you need to allow for athletes to rehydrate and retest. What does that mean as far as close as with those provisions involved?
Yeah, we'll publish both our procedure and our policy documents on this topic in the coming days now that the management committee has approved it. What we are outlining in those documents is that prior to an in-venue event like our live final for the World Championships, we will have hydration testing done 4 hours prior to the event or to the race start time. And what that will allow is an opportunity for any athletes who may have failed their hydration test to safely rehydrate. If we bring the hydration test any closer to the race start time and an athlete were to fail, they won't have an opportunity to safely rehydrate. And we would then obviously run the risk of something like hyponatremia or overhydration, which can be also very, very dangerous. And so that 4-hour window of hydration testing is the most fair and most accessible for all of the athletes. And following the completion of their hydration testing, sometime between that 4-hour window and race start, they'll take their weigh-in as well. We haven't quite nailed down exactly when within that 4-hour window the weigh-in will start, but that will allow athletes an opportunity to continue to hydrate and fuel appropriately for the race without limiting or opening themselves up to any sort of dangerous behavior as best as we can.
Sounds great. Sounds like a really great first step, as you mentioned. Positive, absolutely. Right, the conversation about integrity also extends to anti-doping. Can you tell us about the protocol for Worlds this year? How many athletes do you intend to test?
We have the same protocol that we put in place last year. MyWhoosh is a great partner on this topic. Obviously, anti-doping is something we take very seriously within the UCI and within cycling esports. I honestly cannot remember that number off the top of my head. It's significant. I think what we did last year is we made sure that there was an opportunity for every athlete participating in the finals to be tested. Now, the way the ITA works and the way anti-doping in general works is it's not as if we select the athletes or we say every athlete must be tested. There's a certain randomness to it to ensure that it's fair. And it's all done by the ITA. It's not something that MyWhoosh or the UCI have a hand in. We've basically agreed with the ITA how many athletes or how many tests will be done. and then it's up to them to go and do it. And so that's done intentionally, obviously. We don't want to ever be involved in the anti-doping testing more than we need to be to ensure fairness and integrity. So I don't know that number off the top of my head, but it is very significant as it relates to cycling esports, which is a fantastic step again for us to be taking as a discipline.
Yeah, I think I heard you say last year that it was the most tested event.
Certainly within cycling esports. I obviously would never speak to our other disciplines, but I think from a percentage standpoint, again, I should probably look these things up before our interviews. But I think from a percentage standpoint, we're very, very high in terms of how many tests are done compared to how many athletes are on site in Abu Dhabi with us. And that's done both pre-race. Before they get to Abu Dhabi, they'll have their whereabouts filed with the ITA and can be tested out of competition. They'll be tested in competition prior to the race start. And then obviously post-competition, we'll have testing done as well. And so there's a significant number of tests done for the athletes between the semifinals and post-race in the finals. And a significant number of tests will be done across both men and women, which is very exciting. It's the right way for our discipline to move forward.
So the cycling investigative journalist Chris Marshall-Bell recently wrote a report in Cycling News exploring the rampant doping in fondos and other amateur events, calling it the Wild West, where there's little more than ego at stake. The stakes for cycling esports are obviously much higher, with many riders making their sole source of income through cycling esports. Are you open to the possibility that the same is true for cycling esports? And if so, what measures are you taking to address this issue?
I think you have to be open to the possibility, right? Human nature demands that. I happen to be probably a bit more optimistic on this topic and hope that it doesn't exist. I grew up in an era of cycling where it was a little bit more rampant than it needed to be. And so moving forward, I think what we'll see in UCI sanctioned racing is that we will include testing and anti-doping protocols as part of our sanctioned racing moving forward. Obviously, our national federation partners are doing quite a bit at their level as well on this topic. And then I think at the end of the day, we also have access to a significant amount of athlete data that other disciplines probably don't. And stopping short of saying you could identify somebody who is using performance enhancing drugs through their data, we certainly would have a good step in that direction just through data alone. And so we'll continue to work with our partners and stakeholders across the industry to make sure that we're doing everything in our power to stop this from happening. But yeah, you always have to be open to the possibility that it is happening because of the history in our sport. We just want to do everything we can to continue to root it out.
Yeah, so one thing we know because of that checkered past is that the dopers are always one step ahead of the testers. And when you're testing at only one single event, like Worlds, you risk the potential of not testing the dopers when they're actually getting a benefit from it during training. So with that in mind, do you intend to ever extend the whereabouts program to further than just between the semifinals and the finals?
Yeah, certainly it's something we want to continue to move forward on as the sport becomes more professionalized and more legitimate. That's definitely a thing that needs to be addressed or a topic that needs to be addressed. I think the good news is that we can safely say a handful of our cycling esports athletes are professional athletes in other disciplines as well, whether that be other sports or other cycling disciplines. So many of them are tested in a number of arenas around the globe, whether that be road cycling or triathlon or rowing as an example. And so, yes, a significant portion of the elite esports athletes are through different programs. In fact, every year when the ITA rolls out their whereabouts program, we can quickly tick off a couple of athletes who are already part of it. We can absolutely say that there are a number of esports athletes who are part of a year-round whereabouts program. And certainly as we continue to expand the calendar, it's something that we're going to continue to explore.
Yeah, I can see how once you do move into the sanctioned racing, that it'll be a much more calendar-wide throughout the year type of a situation.
Absolutely.
I think a lot of racers will welcome that. So another one of the most significant developments last year was hardware standardization, with every racer competing on Elite Justo 2 smart trainers that underwent UCI certification. It's an initiative that I covered fairly extensively, and you're collaborating with Elite, MyWhoosh, and the Purdue Engineering Lab again this year to further this initiative. Can you walk us through the standardization process and protocol you've established? For example, where and when did it take place? Who was involved from MyWhoosh in the UCI? How many devices were selected? And what were the general procedural aspects?
Yeah, of course. This is actually a part of the Esports World Championship that has been around from day one, and it's just something we've continued to evolve each year. So in the last 2 years, what we've seen is that elite obviously validates all of their hardware just as a company. We've asked them to take an additional step and ensure that validation across each unit rather than each kind of production batch. And then from there, we took it another step and asked them to validate it against a specific testing regime that we here at the UCI designed to mirror the expected power profiles of this race course itself, with a significant kind of delta against what we expect to see. And we've tested well above and beyond that power output or those thresholds as well. Elite has been a fantastic partner on these two editions of the World Championship and have graciously done all of that. And we did that in Italy at Elite's headquarters with both MyWhoosh and UCI representatives on the ground during that testing process. Those trainers were then securely packed and shipped to Abu Dhabi, where they've been under lock and key ever since, with tamper locks on the trainers themselves and tamper evidence on the boxes. We've sent a statistically significant number of trainers then to Purdue to be tested. Of the 60, I believe, that are going to Abu Dhabi for the live finals, I can't remember the number off the top of my head. I think it was somewhere between 5 and 10. Those went to Purdue. They underwent the same testing regime that we asked Elite to put them through, but it was obviously done independently with the Purdue team and their testing rig. And then the results were both viewed in isolation. What did those trainers do according to Purdue? And then we compared those results with what Elite put all 60 trainers through to make sure that the way Elite tested and the way we've tested are similar. And I can confidently say that all of the trainers we've tested, both with Elite and with the Purdue team, have done extremely well, both in accuracy and precision. We've put them into some very unique testing circumstances. As we all know in cycling esports, the steep gradient, low speed, high torque, low revolution testing protocol that threw everybody for a loop. We did that. We've undergone thermal degradation testing. What if we sprint on this trainer, 10 laps in a row and then recover and continue to sprint? How does that thermal drift occur? And I'm very, very pleased with how the trainers tested. I think the athletes should be assured that the trainer they will be riding on stage in Abu Dhabi is exactly the same as others to the best of mechanical ability. Everybody will be on a fair trainer as they compete against one another in Abu Dhabi.
I actually had a conversation with Dr. Monson and Teal Dowd from Purdue University yesterday, and then I must confirm that they said that the trainers all performed extremely well, actually surprisingly well. They said that they were really spot on. It was reported that the auto calibration was disabled on the devices used last year. Will you be disabling that feature again, and if so, why?
Yes, we will. It's just not necessary. I think you and I actually discussed this in Abu Dhabi last year when we did an interview, and a big piece of live events is removing as many variables or unknowns as possible. The auto calibration feature is a fantastic feature for the at-home user. Personally, I use it on my trainer when I ride on any of the indoor platforms or virtual cycling platforms here at home. It's a great way for the end user, but it's just unnecessary for the World Championships. And at the end of the day, it's another line of code. It's another variable. It's another unknown. And we're just in the business of removing as many unknowns as possible to ensure that the competition is technically sound and fair for the athletes. So we just don't need it. That's the only reason it's not included.
Yeah, it's funny the way that you say that, because I've received a statement from Elite who they basically said the same thing. Auto calibration is great over a long period of time, but a short event like that, it's really irrelevant and redundant. So they certainly agree with you in that respect.
Yeah, and I think it's worth mentioning on this year, the men and the women will be riding on different trainers. So the trainer itself will only undergo the athlete's warm up and then the 3 stages of racing, and then it will be done. The life of a trainer is pretty significant. I say that as I look at my 2017 Wahoo Kicker V2 over here. It's coming up on 10 years old at this point. These trainers will undergo less than an hour of effort. If you feel auto calibration is needed within that hour, I hate to say it, but I think you're mistaken. And so Elite and us are in entire agreement on that. We just don't need it, so let's remove it.
Yeah, so we mentioned the word Purdue and Purdue University and Dr. Monson and this program there. For anyone who's listening, the UCI, Jacob, you can confirm, has been working with the Purdue University, laying the groundwork for a smart trainer homologation program that will be industry-wide to standardize the accuracy and precision of those devices. When I met with Michael Rogers in November of 2024, he told me that program is only months away. It's quite a few months away from November of 2024. So what is the status of the Smart Trainer homologation program, and when can we anticipate its widespread implementation?
It's getting very close. We made some significant changes to that program following last year's World Championships. We think, but Purdue and the UCI, what we've identified is a little bit more of a real world testing regime. We're less concerned about the life cycle of the trainer and more concerned with the performance of the trainer in more similar race conditions. So we've updated that testing protocol, having learned from now the 2 years of testing for the World Championships. And I'll maintain that all of our hardware partners across the industry have been very eager for this. At the end of the day, it just comes down to a bandwidth on our side here at the UCI. It's one of many things we want to deliver, but we also want to make a very knowledgeable first step. I think I can safely say that we're preparing both the testing protocol for the hardware companies to receive, as well as, I don't know how else to say it, the business model of it, right? What will it cost to homologate your trainer as a hardware company? How long is that homologation good for? What are the stipulations of that homologation process? I think as Michael was talking about it, we uncovered two very big questions that we had to solve for, and that's why it's been delayed so long. The first question was, how do we re-homologate a firmware version? Unlike, let's say, a carbon frame, if you change that layup schedule, you can resubmit the technical documentation to the UCI, and we can approve that new layup of the carbon fiber without re-homologating the entire frame design. But when it comes to firmware updates, that's just a new question that we as the UCI had to try and answer in partnership with both our hardware companies as well as Purdue. And then we also have this very susceptible data encryption problem that we wanted to try and solve at the end of the day as well. If you have the world's most accurate and precise piece of hardware that an athlete can compete on, and we at the UCI homologate it and it has a rainbow stripe on the box, fantastic. But then what happens if the signal gets hijacked between trainer and client or between client and cloud? And so we wanted to solve for both those problems. I have no question in my mind that prior to me joining the UCI, we could have homologated hardware itself, but we discovered these two questions that we wanted to try and fold into that, both the firmware version question as well as the data encryption question. And we're very, very close. I have plans to make sure that that's included in an upcoming management committee review. Not to say that it will be approved or it will go into market, but I very much hope that in 2026, we'll have some version of commercially available hardware homologation.
So that brings me to the $1 million question here regarding your pillars, and that is the sanctioned event calendar and the international ranking system, which I personally believe is 100% necessary for the sport to survive. What is the status of that initiative, and what is the timeline for implementation of that?
We're getting very close. In fact, I would make a strong statement that in 2026, we will see a growth of sanctioned racing outside of what we currently have, which is our World Championship event every year. And we're seeing this in a very exciting way, and it's actually two different avenues. We're seeing national federations come to the table with proposed race series or race formats, both their national championships and then just commercially available race structures or race series. We'll be able to sanction those very quickly because they're in conjunction with our national federations. And we just have a greater collaboration in those instances. But then we're also seeing the development, as we had hoped, of independent race organizers coming to the table as well. And this is happening across the globe, which is really exciting. We're not beholden to just platforms organizing their own racing, which is a very difficult process for us to sanction. We can use all the analogies we want about grading your own homework, but we just want more independent organizations within the ecosystem. And that's starting to occur now, which is very exciting. The management committee just approved our regulations update this week actually, which is exciting. And then moving into 2026, we hope to have some version of hardware homologation also approved by the management committee. And then from there, it's just a paperwork issue, right? We can have the sanctioned racing organizational guide, which we already have available. And then from there, we would have a sanctioned racing application for any organizer or platform to come to the UCI and say, I would like to host a race. Here are the things I would like to do in my race. And then we as the UCI can sanction that. But all the infrastructure already exists. Obviously, The UCI has a wonderful calendar of events. The management committee just approved a number of those calendars for 2026 as well. And what that process includes is obviously listing it on the UCI website, having international rankings on the UCI website as well. I think Tadej Pogačar has more road points than anybody has ever had road points right now. And so those systems can be ported over into the esports side relatively quickly because they already exist. We're not asking anybody at the UCI to build from scratch. We're just adding a discipline to that existing structure. So I have high hopes that in 26, we will see sanctioned racing outside of just the World Championships. How much or when in 26 that occurs or how many races occur is up to the market and those organizers, but I'm hopeful that it will exist in 2026.
So you obviously know that Zwift announced that they have canceled all of their elite racing for good. How do you feel that that will impact this program and the future of cycling esports?
Zwift was a great partner to the UCI in the early days of elite esports racing, and they're still a great partner of the UCI across a number of things. Obviously, they have a significant investment in both traditional road cycling, something like the Tour de France Femmes avec Zwift, and also through cycling esports. Their community racing is massive. They focused within the grassroots movement, and there's a very esoteric question of how do you build a sport? Is it from the top down? Do you build elite racing first, and then the grassroots movement comes after that, or do you build the grassroots movement first and then from within that movement comes elite sport? And I don't think there's a right or a wrong answer. Zwift is approaching it very differently. I think what is oftentimes oversimplified in Zwift's announcement is they have not stopped elite racing from occurring on Zwift. They've just stopped organizing it themselves, which I feel is a very legitimate business decision that they've made. It's a big investment to host elite level racing. And for them, it's probably a very narrow part of their customer base, of their subscriber base. And so why would they not dedicate their resources to the overwhelming majority of their customer base? Riders like myself at 3 watts per kilo. I think my Zwift racing score is at 345 right now, if anybody wants to race me. But for elite level esports, again, going back to my earlier answer of allowing independent organizers to come and host their own racing, as I understand it, Zwift is still very open to that, which, not that it's any of my business, makes a ton of business sense to me for them as a subscriber-based company. But they're not turning off elite racing. They've just stopped organizing it themselves. And I would also maintain there is still Zwift organized elite level racing available, just not to the same level that it used to be. But there's still the advanced category in much of their racing. I think Sean Perry, as the race director over there, is still very committed to racing across the board, again, at the grassroots level and for those elite athletes. And all it will take is a very serious race organizer to propose a series to Zwift. And I think you could see elite level racing there. In very short summary, I think it's the right decision for our discipline to allow independent organizers to come to platforms to host that elite level racing. We just need to provide an environment that's accessible to those independent organizers.
I feel like I should have asked that question earlier on, and that might have been the whole entire podcast, because I have plenty of elements of your statement that I'd like to rebut, but we're going to move away from that. So we talked about the 3 pillars, and you mentioned the broadcast early on as one of the major deliverables for this year. I often say that every episode that I put out is somebody's first episode, and you only have one chance to make a first impression. And because cycling esports only has one international event, it's often the introduction and the only time that people look at cycling esports. What steps are being taken this year to ensure that every opportunity is taken to build momentum and grow the audience through the broadcast?
Oh, there's been a lot of steps being taken for this. And in fact, we're kind of deep in the throes of planning this right now. Everything from the graphics are being evolved, both to fall more in line with UCI brand guidelines, but also to be adapted to esports specific data sets. We've seen the virtual world that MyWhoosh has created lends itself to better broadcasting this year. Again, the virtual world is something that we have quite a bit greater control over. Our helicopter shots don't have to be interrupted by trees. We can just remove the trees, the advantage of a virtual world. So the course design has been focused on broadcast evolution as well. And then just generally speaking, the team that delivered the broadcast last year is the same team that's coming to the table this year. And so we just have another year of experience, right? I've maintained that rider cameras need to be more present in that broadcast to complement the avatar movements. But we also need to be able to see our point scoring or our standings more readily available to us. Again, cycling esports is both advantaged and disadvantaged in that we have a plethora of data available to us. What that can mean is we can demonstrate rider effort in a number of ways that you don't see in traditional cycling, but it also means that we have a massive amount of data to get across to the viewers. And if it's too much or overwhelming, then viewers may tune out or just not be able to ingest it as quickly. I liken it often to F1. It's one of the more scientific or data heavy sports available, and you can get, excuse the oversimplification, but you can get as nerdy as you want if it's available to you. But my son also really likes the animated version of F1 because it's easier for him to understand, right? And so we have to always balance that. If an athlete or a viewer is watching the broadcast for 60 seconds, they can hopefully very quickly understand the current scenario of the race, who is in the lead, who is chasing, what the standings of that race are, and then what the current status of the riders themselves are. How much effort is one rider putting out and compared to the other? Are they hopeful to catch or not? And that's done through a number of things, both broadcast data, views in terms of where the cameras are positioned, and then the commentators as well, right? How do we tell that story to the viewer? And so we could have another whole podcast episode on what makes a compelling broadcast and what steps we're taking to deliver against that question. But I think at the end of the day, we will see, again, a very positive step this year in terms of what the broadcast is and how the viewers can quickly and easily understand the race scenario and how exciting our race formats really are.
So you mentioned the complex scoring system, and that was certainly a criticism last year. It was hard to follow even for the average cycling esports enthusiast. Another issue was the 6.5 hour length.
We've done two things, and those are two different topics. From a point scoring structure, we've simplified it. I think there are the same number of opportunities to score points, if I remember one of our conversations with the MyWhoosh team recently, but it should be slightly less complex in terms of just doing the math in real time. We've updated, again, our graphic overlays to include the current standings as well as some projected scoring opportunities and what that does. I think we see that in road cycling a lot. The virtual general classification, the race ended right now, here's what it would look like. And so we're incorporating a lot of that type of data overlay. But then we're also going to see a tighter broadcast. One of those things is bringing double the number of trainers to Abu Dhabi so that the on-the-ground staff doesn't have to worry about switching bikes over to different trainers. We will just switch the entire bike and the entire trainer. The athletes will be able to warm up off stage rather than on stage so we can tighten the broadcast. And that's just something we're going to continue to push on. We're going to continue to evolve that, get our programming as tight and as exciting as possible, but also allowing for the very real consequences of athlete performance. They need time to warm up. They need time to recover between races. You don't want to create a format that is so aggressive that the athletes can't perform or that they don't compete at the level we expect them to compete because they're nervous of blowing up halfway through the race or something like that. And so we'll continue to balance that in the coming editions and see what we can't do. But this year it will be a shorter broadcast, a tighter broadcast, certainly. And hopefully more data will get to the viewers in a more easily digestible format as well.
We both enjoy hockey. Hockey is one of our favorite sports, right? And I always tell people that there's only one sport that I prefer watching live, and it's hockey, because there's so much action that's going on that isn't in the broadcast. And that's the way I described the live event final last year to anybody who ever asked me about it. It was an incredible event to see live. But unfortunately, that didn't really translate over to the viewing audience. There was a connection there that was significantly lost. And for me, it was a disappointment because I wanted that to get across because it was such an exceptional event. If people would have seen what I saw, it would have certainly moved the sport forward significantly. So what changes are being made to create that connection and personality and tell that story from the athletes putting out the effort, seeing the pain faces, those type of things this year?
I think sport, from a viewing perspective, we have two disadvantages as an esport that traditional sport or really every other version of sport I can think of doesn't suffer from. The first is we don't have physical movement of our riders on stage, right? When you watch a hockey game in person or on TV, when you watch a Tour de France stage or a road world championship stage, one rider or one athlete is in front of the other, that person is winning, right? It's an easy thing to understand. As a human being, I show up to a sport and one team is going this way and one team is going that way, and it looks like this team is winning, right? So those are very easily digestible pieces of information for the casual viewer to take in. Cycling esports doesn't have that, right? You have to line up the avatar on screen with the rider on stage or the rider camera. And so marrying those two up is very important to us. We have the advantage that our avatars will be one in front of the other, so you can see who's leading the race. We make that slightly more complex by adding multiple point scoring. That can be solved through simple data overlay and highlighting which rider we're viewing within the data. And then the second thing is we just have a myriad of athletes, right? It's not a one-to-one competition. It's not a 5 versus 5 competition. It's a 1 versus 19 type of competition, right? And so making sure that we take time on each athlete to highlight where they are, both in the standings, but also in the race that's currently occurring, not losing sight of the depth of our field, because again, in stage 1, the rider in 10th or 12th place might be very relevant at the end of stage 3 for the overall win. And so trying to identify both that avatar to athlete connection, the easily digestible point scoring data overlay, and then the depth of field or the breadth of the field, making sure that athletes are demonstrated because they will become relevant later in the race as well. I think those are the 3 main areas that we're focusing on this year. And the MyWhoosh team and their broadcast partners are committed to delivering against that. But it's a very complex problem we're trying to solve. I don't want to oversimplify it with an answer to you here. This will be a good step for us. Again, we'll evolve the discipline, but I'm sure next year we'll take even better steps than we have the ability to now. We'll learn more from this year and we'll continue to improve as we move forward.
Yeah, well, it's great to hear that it's such a priority because obviously for the sustainability of the sport, it needs to be a compelling broadcast product, compelling viewing product to gain fans.
Certainly.
And I think the elements are there. We just have to figure out how to get it across. All right, so I want to just switch gears a little bit here with you, Jacob, because I want to get your perspective on this and also from your perspective as the cycling esports coordinator for the UCI. USA Cycling recently announced a 4-year partnership with TrainingPeaks, making TrainingPeaks Virtual the official platform. Echelon Racing Promotions, Eric Hill, is going to be hosting the first national esports series for USA Cycling, using TrainingPeaks Virtual's GP Explore feature to create replicas of real-world races, such as the Maryland Cycling Classic, Tour of the Gila, Philly Cycling Classic. How does this trend toward replication of real-world events align with the UCI's vision for cycling esports?
I don't have a strong opinion one way or another. I think there's advantages and disadvantages on both ends. I think when you talk about replicating outdoor cycling, you will have some areas of growth. We can do more than an outdoor road race might be able to do, again, on the data front. Or I've always maintained that one of the massive advantages of cycling esports is you can put a camera on the face of a rider putting out their maximum effort. Whereas if they were putting out that same maximum effort out on the road, you can only get the camera so close. We also have never seen a cycling esports athlete wear sunglasses and a helmet, so we can really see the pain on their face. Whereas even up Alpe d'Huez, you might see a rider throw their sunglasses on, so you can't quite see how much they're suffering. But I also will always maintain that esports has advantages in that we don't have to play by the rules of the real world. We can do things that just aren't either physically or humanly possible outdoors. We can be very creative with course design. We can be very creative with some gamification aspects. And so personally, I see the appeal of a one-to-one replication. But I don't think it's the future of cycling esports as well. I think there will always be a place for it. And there are certainly riders who use things like TrainingPeaks Virtual or other publishers to prepare for outdoor races. But when it comes to true cycling esports, I think I fall a little bit more on the side of creativity or innovation. And Dr. Gilbert and the entire TrainingPeaks Virtual team have demonstrated that commitment. That's how that platform has started. They've done a great job in a number of ways. And I'm excited to see where they continue to go. So as far as USA Cycling's push and Echelon Racing's push to replicate outdoor racing, I'm sure there's a great audience for that. And I will certainly be tuning in. I'll probably participate in a handful of those races. I'm American. I'm an American-based rider. And so having time zone friendly races is always great for me as well. And I would love to see how they get along with that program. But I would always encourage everybody and all organizers and our national federations to try and get very creative and very innovative with the race formats, with the course designs. And perhaps it includes a little bit of both, but we'll see where they drive that forward. It's a great program that's announced for the next couple of years, including the USA Esports National Championship, which is fantastic. And the UCI is here to support them in any way that we can. Hopefully, it can be included in our sanctioned racing calendar in future years as well. But let's see how they get on. It's very exciting, and congratulations to them and to USA Cycling for delivering on such an exciting format.
Yeah, it's great to have another platform getting involved at that level. And like you said, the independent organizers, we need more of those to sustain the sanctioned racing model that you're proposing also. So we're all pulling for them, certainly. You've been great, Jacob. So I just want to finish off with a couple big picture questions here for you. First of all, what will be the headline from this year's World Championships?
Oh, that's a good question. Will Jason Osborne stay on the podium? Let's see. I think that's my personal biggest question. The guy's been on every podium ever. I think my goal for this year's Esports World Championship, again, is to have a very fair race and provide a unique opportunity for an athlete to win a rainbow jersey that might not otherwise have that opportunity, right? Might not be able to do it in another discipline or has committed themselves to this discipline and should be rewarded for that commitment. And so I hope we can deliver again a very technically sound World Championship without any issues. And that all athletes are provided with the same opportunity to achieve that dream of pulling over the rainbow stripes. But outside of that, I don't have very significant investment in who wins. I hope they all have a great time, to sound very blasé about it. But I think it'll be an exciting race format. I think it'll be an exciting venue event. The MyWhoosh team is prepared somehow an even better venue than they did last year. I think it'll be even more exciting for the riders and for the viewers at home, both in terms of social media content and broadcast content. And I hope the best athlete on the day can win. It'll be a very exciting day for sure.
Yeah, I'm certainly looking forward to it. Lastly, what will define your progress and UCI's commitment to esports in the coming year?
Sanctioned racing. I think developing a broader racing portfolio that is supported by the UCI is critical to the sport's success. I think this year should prove that we can deliver a world championship repeatedly and do so at the highest of levels, but then taking those learnings and applying it to at-home racing or entirely remote racing is critical to the sport. We talked about this last year, you and I, that I personally believe there will always be a need or a human desire for that in-venue event. I think there's nothing quite like it in the human experience in terms of that tribal aspect of gathering in an arena and watching competition. I find that very, very exciting. And I want to maintain that in esports, and all traditional esports maintain that as well, right? Fortnite or League of Legends or any of the console-based games still host in-person championships quite often. And so I think that will always be a part of our sport, but developing the tools and the ecosystem to allow for fair, incredible racing to occur from people's garages and in people's living rooms is very important. And that will be the measure of success for us moving forward, is can we grow our discipline outside of a single fantastic event each year to host a number of fantastic events throughout the year.
It sounds great to me, Jacob. Thanks so much.
Here's to hoping. Thank you, Chris. Appreciate the time as always.
You can subscribe to the Virtual Velo Podcast on your favorite podcast provider and YouTube. You can follow Emma Martin on Instagram at biking_Emma and Chris, me, at the Zimmunique. You can catch Emma putting word to the action this weekend on the MyWhoosh Sunday Race Club. Head over to thezimmunique.com and please become a member of the Escape Collective to join the conversation and support independent cycling esports journalism. We will have some more interesting guests from the worlds of cycling esports joining us soon. We are waiting to see how the world semifinals play out so we can invite a few of those guests to join us. But we do have Project Echelon's Eric Hill joining us to share an announcement about TrainingPeaks Virtual, as we discussed here, and we're excited to see how that goes. Thank you, Jacob, for sharing your authoritative perspective, and to you for listening. I will remind you to please take care of your heart, get a coronary calcium scan. Emma will always say, ride safely. Goodbye.